morning, kids. Welcome back to another week of Sunday school. We're in a very exciting time of the year. We're entering Advent. So for the next 4 weeks, we will be talking and tying in stories to relate with Advent, some of the lessons we learned. So like hopefully in the gym, you had a chance to talk about why we light the candles and what they mean. For this week, we light the candle of hope. And so we're going to talk about a story in the Bible that brings us hope and relate that to how we have hope. So if you remember, we talked about Joseph, and he brought his family into Egypt when they were going through famine, and that brought hope for his family because they could be fed again and safe. Then we talk about later on with Moses and how with God's help he brought the Israelites out of Egypt and out of captivity, and they crossed the Red Sea, and that brought them hope. And now we're talking about, last week, about Joshua and how they were almost at the promised land. They were so close, they couldn't get there, but then God helped them to break down the fortress of Jericho, and they entered into the promised land, and that brought them hope as well, because God had given them what he had promised. So God's people, the Israelites, are now in their new promised land, and they're happy and they're doing well, and God is taking great care of them. But they wanted a king. They wanted someone that they could see. Now, someone told them, you have a God. He is your king. But they wanted someone that they could see. And God knew that the king would maybe not take as good care of them as he would, but they insisted, and so he sent them a king. So he anointed a king. This king was named Saul, and he seemed like a good fit at first. But then he became proud and didn't really listen to God anymore, and he didn't obey God anymore or love God with his whole heart. So God knew that Saul wouldn't help him with his rescue plan. He wouldn't be a good part for this plan anymore. He knew he needed a king who would love him and teach the people to love him as well. He needed a true king, and he had one in mind. So he told Samuel the priest, go to Bethlehem, and you will find the new king there. And so Samuel as a priest, his job was to listen to God and tell the people what God said. So Samuel went to the little town of Bethlehem, and God told him to go to the house of Jesse. And he was going to choose one of his sons to be the new king. Now Jesse had 7 strong sons. Now, if you were going to be a king in those days, you didn't have to be clever, you didn't have to be rich. You had to look like a king, which meant you had to be tall and strong so you could carry big armor and be strong and defeat everyone so that you look like a great leader. And it didn't hurt to be handsome either. So Samuel asked Jesse to bring each of his sons out one at a time. So he first brought the oldest and the strongest son and thought, this must be the king, is what Samuel thought. He looks like a king. He's big, strong, handsome, but God didn't choose him. So Jesse brought in his next oldest son. He was older and tall too, but God said, nope, not that one. In fact, he brought in all 7 of his sons, and all 7 of them were not the one. God said, nope, these aren't the ones. And Samuel said, is that all, Jesse? That's all your sons? Do you have any more? Jesse laughed. Well, there is the youngest one, but he's just a weakling of the family. He's only the teeny tiny guy. Bring him, said Samuel. So Jesse's youngest son came running up, and God spoke quietly to Samuel. This is the one. His name was David. He has a heart like mine, God said. It is full of love. He will help me with my secret rescue plan, and one of his children's children will be the king, and that king will rule the world forever. So Samuel anointed David's head with oil, which was a special way to show that you are chosen king by God. You will be the new king someday, Samuel told him. So what does a teeny tiny boy being anointed as king have to do with hope? Well, that can give us all hope, because no matter what you look like, big, small, ugly, beautiful, you're all beautiful, right? We are all chosen by God, not because of how we look, but because of our hearts. And that can give you lots of hope because it doesn't matter what you look like. It's all about what's inside that matters to God. So before David actually became king and he was still a little boy out in the fields as a shepherd, there was a war going on between the Philistines and the Israelites. And so all of his brothers, who were a lot older and stronger, were sent off to go as soldiers to fight. And David stayed back to take care of the sheep because someone had to take care of them. So one day, his father Jesse told him, I want you to go bring some provisions, some food and stuff to them and go into the campground and bring this to them. So David sent off with all his stuff to bring to his brothers. But when David got there was nobody outside. He heard shouting from the other side, but all of the Israelite soldiers were nowhere to be seen. So he looked out over and he seen this huge giant of a man. Now you may know him as Goliath. And he was out there taunting and shouting at these men. And he did it every day. Send your best soldiers to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be my slaves. And no one wanted to be around him. He was a monster of a man. He was like 9 feet tall. I'm 5'8". He was like almost twice my size. That's crazy. He bellowed at them, you chickens, your God can't save you. I'll rip your heads off and have you on my bread. He had beady eyes and he was just covered in armor and he was huge and scary. He was like a monster, and these people, these Israelite soldiers were hiding while the Philistines stood behind him laughing because they knew they had them beat with this monster of a man. Now little teeny David stepped out, told them, don't be afraid. I'll fight him for you. Ah, but you're only a little boy, said Saul, who was the king at the time. He is a giant. How can you fight him? He's way too strong for you. Well, God will help me, David said. So the king gave David his armor and said, there you go, good luck. But it was way too big for him. He was just a teeny tiny boy. He told him, I don't need these. So instead, what did he do? He picked up 5 smooth stones from the river, and he took out his slingshot and walked towards Goliath. And just like every other day, out came Goliath. Thud, 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 thud. And he said, you? They sent you, a teeny tiny boy, to come and fight me, a giant? Ha, what is this? You throw your dog food at me? Ha ha, this is a no-brainer. I can easily just do one swipe of my sword and you are gone. And David said, I may be little, but my God is mightier. And the Goliath laughed even harder. Your God cannot save you. I am going to kill you in a moment. Well, David didn't stop. That didn't stop him. He took one stone, put it in his slingshot, and he twirled it around and around and around while Goliath was still standing there laughing his head off at him. And he twirled it, and then he shot it. And that stone went flying at him and hit him right between the eyes. And with a look of shock on his face, he teetered, tottered, and started swaying, and eventually he fell crash right down, dead. God had defeated Goliath with the help of David and his little stone. And that gave those Israelites so much hope because those Philistines were frightened now, and they ran, and the Israelites ran after them and drove them off. Said, no more fighting, you leave us alone and get away. And that gave them the hope they needed to know and trust that God would protect them. He could use even the tiniest little stone held by the tiniest little boy who had the giant hope in God. God promised the Israelites time and time again that he would be with them, that he would rescue them. And each time he came through with his promise and rescued them and delivered them and was with them. But sometimes they would forget and would need a reminder. Just like in the story of today with David and Goliath. They had to be reminded that God was there and would protect them no matter how scary the situation seemed. But each time it would give them a hope for the future, because God promised them that one day he would send a great king who would rescue them all. And we know that he actually did. He sent Jesus on Christmas Day. He sent Jesus into the world, and eventually he would grow up and sacrifice himself and save us. And that can give us great hope, because we know that someday he's coming back, and someday he's going to rescue us all and give us a perfect and brand new life. And I can't wait for that, and I hope that you can find hope in that as well.